I was never a nostalgic person. But when my father passed away at the end of last year, I was the only one in the family who had the courage to clean out the old attic of the house we grew up in. Among boxes of tools, moldy books, and some family albums, I found a small, dark wooden box. No lock, no name, just dust and the scent of something long stored away. Inside, there were dozens of photos. Photos of a place that looked familiar. A lake, a wooden cabin, a campfire, smiling people. And in every photo, I was there. But I don't remember any of those people, nor the camp, nor that summer. That night, I called my mom. I asked about the photos, about the camp. She went silent, far too long. Until she said something like, "That was a long time ago, let it go." She hung up, out of nowhere. My mom never did that. The next day, I went to her house. I brought the photos. She looked at one, then another, and without looking me in the eye, she just said, "This isn't meant to be remembered," and walked out of the room. After the conversation with my mom, my head was spinning. I decided to look online for anything about that place. I searched for Camp Wyndon Lake, which was the name embroidered on the uniforms in the photos. Nothing. I dug deeper, searched state camp records, old lists, public archives, digitized newspapers. I found camps that operated in the 60s, 70s, even the 90s. But nothing with that name. No mention at all. It was as if the place had been erased. Until I found one mention, just one, on an obscure forum about places that vanished off the map. Someone with the username Algador posted a single line in a 2014 thread. "Don't go looking for the camp by the lake. It's still there." That was it. No replies, no other posts. But that stuck in my mind. At the bottom of the same box where I'd found the photos, there was an old notebook, worn and leather bound, its cover darkened by time. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, young, slightly messy handwriting. It was dated during a summer, but there was no year. Most of the entries talked about silly things. Sack races, weird food, lice in the mattresses. But one page was different. The pen pressed harder into the paper. The letters looked shaky. Tonight they called my name, but I pretended to be asleep. The guy from Tent 4 went with them. The next morning, his bed was empty. No one said a word. I read that out loud. Again and again. Trying to figure out if it was a joke, a dream, or something I had actually written. But it got under my skin. Because I've never been an imaginative person. And because Tent 4 shows up in one of the photos, with a bedsheet lying on the ground. That was when I made the decision. I was going to find that place. Even if no one talked about it, even if no map showed it. I hit the road one weekend, guided by notes from the photos and a set of coordinates faintly written in pencil on the back of one of them. I drove for 3 hours into a mountainous region that seemed to match. Back roads, faded signs. At some point, the GPS just froze, a blank screen, my location stuck in place. Still, I kept going. Then, after a curve between 2 trees, I saw it. A sign, worn wood, barely hanging on. The name, Camp Winden Lake, half burned, half covered in moss. The feeling I got when I saw it was physical, like something deep in my stomach had twisted tight. But I kept walking. The entrance to the camp was marked by a wooden gate with rusted chains, but it was slightly open, as if someone had passed through recently. I went in on foot. What I saw felt like a time capsule. The cabins were still there, along with the picnic tables, and an old shed with a crooked sign that read, "Dining Hall." Everything was covered in leaves, moss, and silence, but nothing was broken, no shattered glass, no doors hanging open. It was as if the place had either been abandoned suddenly or carefully preserved. I stepped into one of the cabins. The wood creaked beneath my feet, but it held firm. On the wall, names were carved with a pocket knife, and among them was mine. It was my handwriting, Josh 2008. But I don't remember ever writing that. I stepped into the dining hall. The air was damp and moldy, but there was also a faint smell of old food, like something had been cooked a long time ago, and the scent refused to leave. The tables were intact, with rusted metal plates still set in place. But one thing made me stop. On the back wall, behind a torn curtain, there was a bulletin board. Pinned to it with old thumbtacks were missing persons posters. Nearly 20 of them. Black and white photos, some faded with time. Names, ages, all between 8 and 17 years old. One of them made me freeze, because it was me. It was a photo of me taken when I was younger. I recognized the t-shirt, a black one with a guitar print. I remember it clearly because it used to be my favorite. But on the poster, it said, "Missing since July 2008. Last seen, Camp Winden Lake." I was paralyzed. If I was standing there, how could I have gone missing? Behind the bulletin board, there was a narrow door. It looked like a storage room. I went in. Inside, I found an old TV, the kind with a bulky tube and a VCR. I don't know what made me press play. Curiosity, maybe, or pure instinct. The screen lit up with static. It was a home recording. It showed people running between the cabins, laughing, playing, singing, waving at the camera. And then, the footage suddenly cut to what looked like a nighttime ceremony. Teenagers gathered around a bonfire, and adults, wearing black hoods, holding hands in a circle. The camera slowly zoomed in. One of the adults raised something in their arms, a burlap sack, that seemed to be moving. The recording stopped there. Blue screen. Tape ended. I stumbled out of the storage room, shaking. I needed to get out of there, to breathe. I ran outside, toward the entrance trail, but it wasn't there anymore. Where the path had been, now there was only dense forest, as if it had never existed. I circled around, searching for a signal. I pulled out my phone, and suddenly, a signal bar appeared for 2 seconds. It was enough to receive a single message. No number. No sender. "You're back." I froze. The signal bar vanished right after. I screamed for help. No answer. Only the echo between the trees. And then, I heard footsteps. Not my own. I started running, aimless. I moved away from the center of the camp and plunged into the forest. But the more I ran, the more everything looked the same. The same trees. The same moss-covered rock. It was like running in circles. That's when I saw something on the ground. It was an identification bracelet, like the ones used at camps. The name was written in permanent marker. Benji, 2008. My stomach twisted. Benji. He was my best childhood friend. And I had completely forgotten about him until that moment. The memory hit me like a punch. We ran away one night. I remember that. Running through the trees, but he fell. I kept running and never looked back. But if I forgot him, what else have I forgotten? After finding Benji's bracelet, everything changed. It was as if my memory was being reactivated. Fragments came back in flashes, faces, laughter, screams, a lake, a rope, an overturned canoe. I decided to return to the administrative cabin. I needed to search for more. I rifled through drawers, old files, and moldy folders. Until, behind a picture hanging on the wall, I found an old map of the camp. On it, there was a marking in red. Something called Area Q. It wasn't a trail. It wasn't a cabin. It was a zone beyond the forest, behind the hill. We'd never heard of it before. But now, it seemed to be calling me. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward this so-called Area Q. The trail was uneven, almost invisible, but something inside me already knew the way. As I climbed the hill, I saw footprints, too many of them, and all recent. I started hearing whispers and voices, softly singing. The same campfire song we used to sing at camp, but distorted, slow, almost unrecognizable. When I reached the top, I saw a circle of stones, blackened in the center like an old bonfire. And around it, there they were. People standing, backs turned to me, wearing camp uniforms. Motionless, in absolute silence. I took a step back and tripped, fell hard to the ground, and the flashlight rolled a few feet away. One of them turned around. It was Benji. Same face, same hair, but his eyes, they weren't his. They were empty, like he was there, but no longer himself. He said my name. "Josh, why did you leave me behind?" The voice was the same, but it echoed as if it came from everywhere at once. I tried to speak, but my throat went dry. Then another one turned, then another, and another, until they were all staring at me. 20 faces, all of them gone missing in 2008. And they said, in unison, "You left, we didn't." I ran without thinking, stumbling down the hill over roots, leaves, and stones. But the people didn't follow me. They just watched, as if they knew I'd end up coming back. The trail ended in a clearing. At the center, there was a half-buried concrete structure. It looked like an old bunker, unmarked, with a rusted metal door. On the ground, a symbol drawn in charcoal, a circle with lines crossing through the center. I'd seen that symbol before. On the tape, it was the same one used in the ritual. I grabbed a branch and tried to wipe the symbol away, but it wouldn't come off. It was like it had been burned into the earth. I looked at the door. It was slightly open, and from inside came a sound, a muffled chant, a melody with no words. And with it, a feeling that if I stepped inside, I would never come out the same. The door creaked open slowly. The air that escaped from inside was thick, the smell of rust, mold, and something that resembled damp flesh. I lit the space with my flashlight. It was a narrow concrete corridor, paint peeling from the walls, old cables running along the ceiling. It looked military, but abandoned for decades. Still, the emergency lights were pulsing red. I moved slowly, map in hand, and for the first time, I noticed the map showed this lower level too, but it had a different name. Q Lab. I saw numbered doors along the hallway. Q1, Q2, Q3, until one of them was slightly open, Q5. I stepped inside. It was an observation room, a thick glass window separating it from another chamber. On the other side of the glass, a bed, a chair, and in the center, a teddy bear identical to the one Benji used to have. On the table, there was an old binder covered in dust. Project Psalm 89 inoculated participants. My name was there, and Benji's, and 32 others, ages ranging from 8 to 24. I opened one of the folders. Reports, dates, tests involving auditory stimuli, sensory deprivation, forced isolation, controlled trauma induction. Each child was labeled as patient Q, followed by a number. Benji was Q5. I was Q6. My records ended abruptly. Date, July 14, 2008. The day of the fire, or rather, the day of the total evacuation simulation. I left room Q5 in shock, past 2 more doors. Q6 was locked. But as I approached, the old intercom on the wall began to hiss on its own. A click, static, and then a familiar voice. Josh? It was Kyle's voice, the camp instructor who disappeared the same day as the fire. Josh, you shouldn't be here. What is this? What did you do to us? I yelled into the intercom. Long silence. Then the voice answered, calm and grim. You came back, so part of you still belongs to us. The others accepted. You will too. Everyone comes back. Everyone. The static grew louder, and for a second, I heard another voice in the background. Benji's, whispering. Run. I ran. Not to explore anymore. Now it was escape. But something had changed in the corridors. The walls seemed to stretch. Doors disappeared. The red emergency lights turned white, then blue, then into a color I couldn't even describe. My senses were failing, as if reality itself was being rewritten. I started hearing memories, fragments from childhood, songs, my parents' voices, laughter from camp, but all out of order, all repeating. I was inside something, inside a machine. Area Q wasn't a place. It was a mental state, induced, created through experiments with sound waves and light patterns. We weren't being taken physically. We were being reshaped from the inside out. And now, it was coming back. With every step I took down that corridor that shouldn't exist, my memories grew more tangled. It felt like a maze inside my mind, where past and present collided in disjointed fragments. I saw faces, children between 8 and 17 years old, that I didn't remember ever meeting. Distant screams, the sound of doors slamming and opening on their own. I tried to focus to find an exit, but the walls shifted, reshaping themselves to match my confusion. Reality was melting, and at the center of that chaos, I heard Benji's laughter, clear and cruel. I wasn't alone in that nightmare. In one of the rooms, I found other children between 8 and 17 years old, or what was left of them. Empty eyes, mechanical movements. They were murmuring disjointed phrases, repeating something that sounded like a mantra. When I tried to speak to them, one of them, a girl with long hair, locked eyes with me and said, "You shouldn't have come back. They don't forgive." Amid the chaos, I heard a strange sound, a high-pitched frequency, like an alarm. And suddenly, the children began to move in perfect sync, like puppets on invisible strings. In a room next door, I found an old TV turned on, paused on a video. It was a recording of the experiment. Children like us, in isolated chambers, undergoing tests with lights, sounds, and visual stimuli. What sent chills down my spine was when I saw a familiar face. My own face, staring into the camera, motionless, unblinking. Then the video rewound on its own, and a cold, distorted voice began to narrate. Subject Q6, mental suspension state in progress. Re-entry scheduled in 30 minutes. I turned off the TV, but the voice kept echoing in my head. The exit appeared, but it wasn't a regular door. It was a lever, simple, rusted. A voice echoed behind me. "You can leave, or you can stay." Staying meant accepting everything, the forgetting, the repetition, becoming one of them. Leaving meant returning to a world I no longer recognized, a world where nothing would make sense anymore. I looked back and saw Benji waiting for me with that sad smile. He whispered, "Sometimes the real prison is out there." I pulled the lever. Everything went dark. And I woke up, or at least, I think I did. When I woke up, everything seemed normal, but something was wrong. The sun looked too pale. People on the street walked as if they were switched off. It felt like I was trapped between two worlds, the one I left behind and the one I could no longer reach. My house was different. The clock showed a time that didn't exist. My phone didn't receive any new messages, but old notifications from years ago kept appearing. I tried talking to my mom, but she looked at me with empty eyes, no recognition at all. I asked, "Mom, do you know who I am?" She replied, expressionless, "You should know I don't." I discovered there was a space between the shadows, a place where everything we've lost remains trapped. The faces of missing children, the voices of forgotten people. And there, Benji was waiting for me. But he wasn't what he seemed. He was the shadow of a broken promise, a memory that refused to die. I tried to reach him to ask who he really was, but he simply vanished, leaving behind an echo of laughter that shouldn't exist. That's when I realized this place wasn't just a nightmare, it was a prison. I tried to escape that place, but now I understand it's inside me. Every lost memory, every forgotten face, every sound echoing in my head is part of this mental prison. When I look in the mirror, sometimes I see Benji watching me, smiling sadly. Sometimes in the silence, I hear the sound of that lever being pulled again. I don't know if this is a dream, a memory, or a warning. All I know is that I can't escape, and maybe you're trapped in this cycle too. This is the story I never wanted to tell, because to tell it means to believe it's real, and believing is the first step to getting trapped. But now that you've heard it, will you escape? Or will you get lost in the space between the shadows?